PicksWise is the #1 home of free sports betting picks, props, and parlays. Helmed by a team of trend-watching, data-devouring sports fanatics giving you the who, how, and why behind every prediction. For every game, every day, and every sport, all for free, visit PicksWise.com to make your next bet better. PicksWise backs responsible gambling. If you or someone you know wants help, call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Game week is here. Budweiser's weekday sports beat 6 days away from Notre Dame and Florida State kicking off the season in Tallahassee. Brian Driscoll from AverageBreakdown.com will be there. You excited about making that trip to Tallahassee?
I am. The last time I was in Tallahassee, it didn't end real well, so I'm hoping that this time it'll be a little bit better finish.
And that's been what, like? How many years has that been? 7 seasons now?
7 years, yeah.
Man.
Yep. Still 7 years, and it was still a bad call.
Yeah, I know. And it's hard for Irish fans to forget it, and I don't blame them either.
Yep.
So
not one bit.
Nope.
Not one bit.
Well, let me start with this, I guess. Jack Cohn, we've talked a lot about him, obviously. Going into season opener like this, on the road, the environment, the whole thing, how much value do you put on the experience that he has going into this game?
A ton. I mean, this is exactly the kind of game that you brought Jack Cohn here for. You know, this is why you valued his experience and the fact that he's played at Nebraska. We all know that no matter whatever you want to say about Nebraska's program right now, and it's not great, Nebraska's got a great fan base, right? He's played on the road against a top 10 Minnesota team in the snow, late in November, got the W. He's played in the Big Ten championship game. He's played in the Rose Bowl. You know, he's played at Penn State in a game. You know, so he's played at Iowa. These are the kind of games that you recruited him to play. And having a guy like him that can be that calm, steadying influence, and you know, Florida State's got a great crowd and a lively crowd, but it's not, you know, it's not going to be something that he's never seen before.
So do you think either of the other two guys, either Drew Pine or Tyler Buchner, see the field in significant, you know, like I don't want to say a high leverage portion of the game, but when the game is still potentially in doubt, like could there be packages for either one of these guys?
Well, barring injury, I don't see Drew Pine playing. I think he's the number 2 quarterback, and the thing with Drew Pine is he's kind of the same style of quarterback as Jack Cohn,
Mm-hmm.
So there would be, I mean, unless he was like right on Jack Cohn's heels for the starting job, I wouldn't see any reason to play him in a normal leverage situation, you know, a normal in-game situation. So I think his moments will come if Notre Dame's got a big lead. Tyler Buchner's a different story. I would not be shocked if they have some kind of role for him. I don't know if they will. I'm not giving away any trade secrets. I just think that, you know, when Brian Kelly said this kid's dynamic and dynamic players help you win, my response was, well, yeah, that's a great, absolutely. I don't know if this is necessarily the game they'd want to introduce that in. You know, maybe they might say, hey, look, let's just go on the road, let's get this dub, and then we'll come home and we'll get Tyler ready for Toledo.
Figure that other stuff out, yeah.
yeah. You know, that may be something there too, but they may also say, I think part of this just depends on how they feel about Tyler's ability to mentally handle this type of environment, and I don't know the answer to that.
No team can afford to overpay for talent. Build a championship team with Indeed, the smart way to only pay for quality candidates that meet your must-have requirements. When hiring gets hard, you need Indeed, the job site that makes hiring incredibly simple. Just attract, interview, and hire. In fact, with Indeed, you can do all of your hiring in just one place. Indeed knows how important it is to make the most of your recruiting hours and dollars. And with Indeed, you can save time and money by setting your must-have qualifications and only pay for the quality candidates that meet them. Get started right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Get a $75 credit at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Offer valid through September 30th. Terms and conditions apply.
Well, and when we talk about environment, this offensive line with basically 5 guys working together for the first time, one guy back and hasn't really played beside these other guys before, and so now you've got a unit of 5 out there. And again, when you go into this kind of environment, even like Georgia, obviously from a couple of years ago, comes to mind. Even some of your best guys will false start and just communication issues, those kind of things. How big a question for you is that going into this?
That's a huge question. I mean, that was game 3.
Yeah.
And in that 2019 season, I think they had, 4 starters coming back from the previous year's team. Because when you consider that Alex Bars got hurt in game 5 and Aaron Banks ended up replacing him for 6 starts, I think the only new starter was Jarrett Patterson at center, right? I think it's a concern. Certainly, I think you have to worry about the false starts, but not just the false starts, but just the communication. What's the communication going to be like? When they're making their line calls and their protection calls and their mic calls and those type of things. And are they going to be? Look, you can turn the radio up as loud as you want. You can turn the speakers up as loud as you want. You can't. I don't believe you can replicate 70, 80,000 people screaming in a stadium, especially early in the game. And I think that's why it's going to be so incredibly important for Notre Dame to start fast. And that's going to be a big key in this game.
I've never been to a football game down there. How do you think the environment compares to some of these other places, whether it's Georgia or, I don't even know if I'd throw Virginia Tech. It's like, okay, great opening song, but other than that, the environment kind of died. How would you compare Florida State's environment down there, especially, for a night game?
I'd compare it a lot to a Notre Dame home game, to be honest with you.
Okay.
It's about 82,000 people, so it's not like the 110 of Michigan. And, I wouldn't say that they're as loud as the Georgia crowd. I think the Georgia crowd was pretty rabid. I don't see it being as loud. The Miami crowd was pretty nuts that game in 2017.
Yeah, that's
not normally how the Miami crowd is. So I don't really see it as that kind of audience. I think they're loud. They're certainly, I think there's going to be about 11,000 fewer people at this game than there was at the Georgia game just because of the size of the stadium. That Georgia team had a fan base that knew they were playing for a potential shot at the championship, because it was an early season, but it was 2 top 10 teams. Florida State's just hoping to go to a bowl game, so I think that's part of it too. The difference too is when Notre Dame grabbed leads against Georgia, because people forget Notre Dame had some leads in that game against Georgia in 2019. That crowd was still in it because they knew that there was. I think in this game, if you jump out on them early, you're going to get a pretty quiet crowd the rest of the game because it's not a typical rabid crowd. And look, the other thing too is I always kind of evaluate the rabidness of a crowd of do you still show up when the team's not great? Mm-hmm. And if you go back and look at some of Florida State's fan numbers back in 2019, for example, the last time they could have full crowds. 50,000 for the Boise State game, 52 for Louisiana Monroe, 46 for Louisville, 60 for NC State. 60. They couldn't even fill the crowd for Miami. That's. I think that says a lot about where this fan base is with this football team right now.
Maris Leofau is out. Brian Kelly confirmed it today. Your confidence in J.D. Bertrand is what?
Well, in some areas it's high. When I look at run game, I look at a team that run game wise, I expect it to be not a drop off. And matter of fact, it's look, I think they could end up being a little better than they were with Maris and against the run. I certainly expect them to be better than they were last year. And to me, ultimately, we can talk about what it would have been like with Maris, but we never saw Maris as a starter.
Yeah.
He got hurt before the season started. It's more about, okay, can he produce better than what we saw last season? That's the key. And I think, but even looking at it from the Maris standpoint, I think the run game will be better. Where I have concern is I don't expect – I like J.D. Bertrand a lot. Maris is long. He's fast. and he was a kid that played cornerback early in his football career, so he can cover. And I think that's where you're going to see the drop-off is in coverage and then also as a pass rusher. I think Maris was had potential to be a really good pass rusher. I think that's where we're going to see a drop-off. But when it comes to running the football, I don't expect Notre Dame to miss a beat with J.D. Bertrand, and they could potentially be a little bit better because that's his wheelhouse, right? That's where I think J.D. is going to be at his best.
He's Brian Driscoll from IrishBreakdown.com. Interesting looking at the depth chart today. No real surprises, but the one thing that I did see, the Rover, and I think we touched on this a little bit last week, but they've got Kaiser as the number 1, and then it also says or Isaiah Pryor, not number 1 and then just number 2. It says or Isaiah Pryor or Paul Mawala. So, you think we're going to see all 3 of these guys Saturday?
I always thought we'd see all 3. I'm curious if there's going to be a true 3. Like those ors can mean one of 2 things. One is it could be, we know who our starter is, but we're going to play all 3. Because I think we had ors every year last year with 3 tight ends, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And Brock Wright was always listed as the starter most weeks. So is it going to be like that where, we're going to have 3 guys who are going to play a ton of football? Or is it going to be, Jack Kaiser's a starter, but there's also going to be a role for Paul Mawala and Isaiah Pryor. I think there's 2 different options, but I certainly would be surprised if we don't see at least 2 of them play a ton and potentially get a third guy in there, especially with some of the shakier athletes that Florida State's going to put on the field in the slot, and the fact that Florida State does like to throw the ball to their running backs, and Mike Norvell really likes getting his running backs the football, and that's an area where the Rovers and the Will linebackers could have a big impact in this game, positively or negatively.
Yep, absolutely. Brian Driscoll from IrishBreakdown.com. We're going to talk more specifically about Florida State on Wednesday when we have you back on, but Jordan Travis, he burned Notre Dame with his legs last year, almost 100 rushing yards. This is an aggressive defense that Marcus Freeman has. How do they contain him, assuming that he's the starter Sunday?
Discipline is going to be incredibly important, and I think one of the misconceptions that maybe some people can have when you're looking at a mobile quarterback is to say, hey, he's really athletic. You got to sit back and just, I don't believe that. I think you can still attack. I just think there has to be a level of discipline within that attack. Hey, look, if you're a B gap guy, you got to stay in the B gap. You can't lose contain because he will. If you go A gap and another guy goes A gap, or you don't come and he sees that B gap open, he's going to take off and he's going to get in space, and you do not want him in space. So I think that's obviously a big part of this. But I think this is a much better here's the thing about last year's game that I think sometimes we forget. I know I forget it sometimes. Notre Dame had missed 2 weeks because of COVID last year going into this game.
That was a big
deal. They
deal.
had to cancel the Wake Forest game. They played this game on October 10th. The last time Notre Dame played was September 19th, almost a full month before Notre Dame was able to play a game again. And remember, Sean Crawford was playing cornerback because they had so many corners out. There's a lot about this game that said we didn't get Notre Dame's best day that day on defense.
Right.
But part of it was that was always an issue for Clark Lee's. The one kryptonite that we saw with Clark Lee's defense was mobile quarterbacks, and every defense has one. Right? Every defense has a kryptonite. If you're good enough here, you can give them problems.
We saw it at Louisville 2 years ago.
Exactly. We saw it with Louisville. We saw it with, even with Mike Elko's defense, with Malik Rozier when they played Miami down in 2017. He had a lot of scrambles for runs, and it's the similar philosophy. We saw it several times. And I don't think Marcus Freeman's defense has that same kryptonite, so I think they're better prepared for it. I think especially because it's going to be a faster, more athletic defense. I think they can handle that a little bit more effectively. I'm more concerned about can they limit the big plays, meaning, missing us again. That's my biggest fear with this defense, Sean. It's not necessarily Jordan Travis, who I think is a dangerous player, but Notre Dame has a lot more film on him now. Remember last year when they played, the only film they had of him was against Jacksonville State. He didn't play really the first 2 games.
Yeah.
James Blackman was the quarterback. So that's another thing, but it's more about first game woes, gap integrity. Are you losing gaps? When you look at Jordan Travis, when you look at Jashawn Corbin at running back, when you look at Lawrence Tafili, those are all guys capable of ripping you apart if you're not gap assignment correct. That's a concern I always have in game one, and it's a concern I have about Notre Dame and Alabama and Ohio State and every other team that doesn't return 11 starters from last year.
Big difference. Yeah.
It's just the nature of it. And so those are the things that I'm more concerned about in this opener is, are you going to play your game, or are you going to be what we often see in openers, which is you tend to be a little sloppy and make some mistakes and things like that. If they can avoid some of that for the most part, then I think this defense is better equipped to handle the mobile quarterback. It's just about limiting the big plays.
Hey, I wanted to ask you, Brian Kelly was asked a little bit about the idea of more 21 personnel this year, 2 running backs and 1 tight end, and that, of course, would mean Chris Tyree and Kyron Williams on the field at the same time. And it's not just that they're like, traditional 2 backs in the backfield, pro set, and all that kind of stuff. It's like the combination of things that you can do with them. So I'm just curious, like, what your ideal personnel grouping is, when you look at this team and the kind of skill that they have on offense.
My ideal personnel situation with this Notre Dame team is that they don't have an ideal personnel grouping. and I mean that because, like, the thing that's unique about this team is they can be just as good in 11 personnel, that's 1 back, 1 tight end, 3 receivers, as I think they can be in 12 personnel, which is 2 receivers, 2 tight ends, 1 back, as they can be in 21. That's what makes this group so unique. You can take Avery Davis out or Braden Lindsey out and put a back in, and you've got a guy like Kyron Williams who had over 1,000 yards career receiving yards in high school. You've got a guy like Chris Tyree. They say he's one of the most explosive players in college football. Why would you not want to get him on the perimeter and get him the ball in space? And then, hey, you've got to defend him running a bubble screen as you're running inside zone to Kyron Williams. Have fun with that. Okay, have fun defending that. Well, then you can take him out and you can put Lawrence Keys in and do the exact same thing. Or you can go 2 tight ends and say, hey, we're going to run a little power football, but we also have tight ends that can stretch the field. I think that's what makes me so fired up about this, what this offense can be, Sean, is if you're Tommy Rees, you're like, good Lord, like, this is just like Christmas for me. I've got deep receivers. I mean, guys like Xavier Watts and Deion Colsey aren't even in the 2 deep in a 3-receiver offense, right? I mean, that speaks volumes about how loaded they're receiver. There's guys not in the 3 deep at tight end that would start for, Kane Barong is probably the number 1 or 2 tight end for at least 4 or 5 teams, and Notre Dame is going to play this year. He's not even number 3 on this defense or on this offense. So I think that's the thing, is you have to be more multiple than you were last year because you're healthier. Look, I give the staff a hard time for how conservative they were last year, but going into the season, they anticipated having Kevin Austin and Braden Lindsey.
Right.
You lose 2 weapons like that, it's going to change how you go about your business.
Yeah.
It just will.
Yep.
And so I think they were forced into being a little bit more conservative than the last year and being more 12 and 13 oriented than I think they otherwise would have been if they had a Braden Lindsey and Kevin Austin. Well, right now you're pretty healthy on offense, and that means to me just throwing all types of different looks. I mean, you can go 2 backs, one play, Sean, and have 2 backs in the backfield with a tight end running power football with you. You can even do like that old diamond formation that teams used to do. Oklahoma State does. And then the very next play with that same personnel, you can go empty and be just as good throwing the ball.
Right.
There aren't a lot of teams that can do that, and that's what makes this Notre Dame roster unique.